Okay, today I am going to wade into a cultural debate that's going on right now. Specifically, it's ramped up in the last couple of weeks, and this is the issue of cameras in classrooms, specifically cameras in K through 12 classrooms. Uh, and I spent a lot of the last couple of weeks trying to really do some research on this topic so that I could have a well formulated and articulate perspective on it. I don't necessarily have an answer or a conclusion. I know what I want, but I do think there's a lot of larger issues that we need to tease out as a culture before we wade into this reactionary debate that's going on right now. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what the debate is in the last couple of weeks. The debate, as it stands right now, is about classroom content. Specifically, critical race theory has come up as a classroom content matter in K through 12 schools, and there is a big push, mostly by conservative media. Mostly by conservative media. I don't know about the political breakdown of the parents who do and do not want cameras in the classroom, but it's a big push to say, look, K through 12 schools are going to start teaching something that we do not like, and so we want cameras in the classroom so that we can see how teachers are treating students, what it is that teachers are teaching students. That's what the big push is about. Now, I do want to point out that cameras in classrooms is not a new debate. Decades ago, there was a big push for cameras in classrooms and cameras in schools to monitor student behavior. So the roles have been reversed and flipped in the past with regard to what are the cameras being used to monitor, to whom are the cameras supposed to monitor. And so to act as if cameras in classrooms to monitor behaviors is new is incorrect. It's just this debate on who it is that is being monitored. And so I do see a lot of hypocrisy from people in the last couple of weeks with regard to sort of acting as if this is some sort of new conversation that we're having when we're not. It's an old conversation, but the debate is just who is in charge of the cameras and who gets to point the cameras at whom and for what purpose. So let me start here as far as my own opinion. Ideally, I don't want cameras in the classroom, period, full stop. I do not want cameras in the classroom. I think that cameras in the classroom specifically are inappropriate if they ever go on to the students in the classroom. This includes K through 12 as well as college students. So part of the debate when people say cameras in classrooms, if they do want cameras in classrooms to monitor teacher content, I think one thing that they should be more specific about is cameras as well as like the microphones or the recording devices would just be on the teachers. No cameras on students, no microphones on students. Students should not be identified with regard to the questions and concerns they're bringing up in the classroom. But I don't want cameras in classrooms, period. I don't like, just generally speaking, the constant surveillance of everyone in the 21st century. I think it's absolutely horrifying that there are cameras on us all the time, even in public settings, right? I understand that, public setting, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. We'll get to that in the second slide here. But regardless, it's like I don't like it. I don't like cameras on public streets. I know that sometimes they use them to solve crimes. I don't like them. I don't like that there's phone cameras everywhere, and at any given moment while I'm walking down the street, somebody could have a phone camera on and catch me on it. I don't like it. Home doorbells, if you Google some interesting articles out there, people are now discussing whether or not home doorbells are sort of on this gray area of privacy concerns, because if I have a doorbell with a camera on it, it's also catching my neighbor across the street and a couple neighbors to the side of me. And so, it's one thing to say I want to watch my front porch, but we all know that my home doorbell does not just catch my front porch. It catches some of the neighborhood stuff going on too. And that's an interest, it's a privacy concern. So I don't like all the cameras everywhere. I'd rather have them not be in the classroom, but this is a debate that's going on, so I want to try to tease it out a little bit. All right. First thing I would mention is, where are our intentions coming from for wanting cameras in the classroom? I do think there are good intentions for wanting cameras in the classroom that are removed from the current CRT content debate. All right. So the first is just accessibility and study guides. So in full disclosure, the last year and a half for COVID, I've been teaching at home and online, and after a couple of weeks, my students were having difficulty accessing my lectures through the campus portal. And so I said, screw it, I'm just going to post my things publicly on YouTube because public YouTube access is the easiest way for all of my students to access my stuff. So about 70 to 80% of the lectures that I gave are posted somewhere on YouTube. The other 20, 30%, they're not posted publicly because those would be days when I would come together with my students in Zoom and we'd have discussions. And again, those aren't recorded because those are discussions. My students are obviously commenting. I don't want my students to be recorded at all. I don't want them to, I don't want their faces out there. I don't want their comments out there because people can take that stuff in the wrong way. But as far as, the content of the lectures, I don't think that it's completely inappropriate to record the lecture of a teacher for a day and then say, okay, like here's the material. If a student misses class, if a student has problem with note taking or a learning disability, my students told me that they liked the online lectures that were recorded because they could go back and use those lectures to study for an exam. If they missed the content the first time, they can rewind the content. If I speak too fast, they can back up the soundtrack and watch it again. So I do think that there's some really good reasons to why we would want to record classroom lectures. And I think the same could be done in a K through 12 setting. K through 12, it's going to be more hands-on discussion group work with the students. But that's not to say that, 30% of a teacher's time isn't, straight lecture with regard to the material. I could easily see a math teacher recording a lecture with regard to how to solve a quadratic formula and then posting it online. And I think it's, would be useful in some ways for a parent to have access to that because there's a lot of parents. I'm not a parent, but I'm definitely an adult who took math a long time ago. It'd be nice to have a refresher from, my hypothetical son or daughter's teacher, so I could watch how the teacher explained it, and then I could help my kid, with their homework later at home. So I don't think it's out of the question to say, look, it'd be a good resource if mom and dad are helping the student with homework to be able to. It'd be good for the parent to be able to see what and how the teacher taught the material so that I could be in a better position to help my son or daughter with regard to, their math homework. All right. So I think that's perfectly appropriate and acceptable. The other reason, just sort of like a large transparency issue with myself, right? So these are my own personal politics now. Public teachers, right? So we're not going to talk about private schools. They can do their own thing. Public teachers are government officials, so their work should be for public consumption. That's just a position I've had forever. I've gone through kindergarten through my PhD was all public schools. I've only ever taught in public schools. I'm a big person on transparency. So if we're going to have transparency for public officials in other regards, whether they're police officers wearing body cams, whether or not they're people who work at City Hall, judges and courts are open places where you can go, all right, open trials, these sorts of things are open to the public. It's a hard argument to say that public teachers are the one exception with regard to government employees who have some sort of right to privacy with regard to their public government work. If every other government official has their work out there in the open, I don't think that it's unreasonable to say there should be some sort of transparency with regard to what it is they're teaching. Again, I would rather have it not be through a camera. I think, more open access to things like syllabus or allowing, parents into the classroom as teacher aides. These sorts of things are better to have conversations as opposed to cameras because that all puts us in this defensive mode. But I'm a big fan of government transparency in all facets. Now, there are bad intentions, right? And I think this is where people start to sort of draw political lines, right? Overzealous trolls who just want to sit there and watch a teacher teach forever to find the one piece of fumbling and bumbling that happens in the classroom when it comes to teaching. So one thing I tell my students is that on days that I teach, I might be speaking for 4, 5, 6 hours a day with regard to lecture over multiple classes. I'm gonna trip over my words. I'm gonna have a gaffe here and there. There's definitely been times when I've said something and as I'm saying it, I see the little speaking bubble coming out of my mouth and I want to take all the words and shove them back down in order to rephrase the comment I've made. We've seen this happen on, definitely students in classrooms have posted out of context things that their teachers have said because they've secretly recorded them on a camera, then they post it on YouTube. I don't think this is fair, especially for people whose profession is to speak. Again, for 4, 5, 6 hours a day, it's like there's going to be there's going to be times when you are inarticulate. There's definitely times I'm inarticulate. I don't want someone to take a 30-second soundbite out of an hour-long lecture um, to make it seem as if I'm a horrible person, right? There's definitely ways in which I use examples that are extreme in their nature, because I want to make a following point to show how extreme they are. So if you just take the extreme part and you don't put the context around it, it's like, hey, I'm using this to prove a bigger point. Then yeah, you can use that soundbite to act as if that's what I was actually saying when there's a larger context. So I do think there's bad intentions. If people just want to constantly troll and not allow people the freedom and ability to try different pedagogical strategies to get to teach the lesson. Yeah, I think that's a bad reason to have to have cameras in classrooms. But I do think there are some good reasons. But again, overall, I'd rather there not be classroom cameras. But this is the debate we're in now. This is what I think. This is where some of the rub comes in. This is a big thing that I think people are missing in the larger public debate. We're having a debate in the last 2 weeks about cameras in classrooms, but the fact of the matter is there's already cameras in classrooms. So I don't know why it is we're choosing to debate this one thing now. That's not true. I know why we're debating it, because there's this topic called CRT and people want to like dig into it. But that's one small piece of a much larger debate. And the big debate is, like, we've had cameras in classrooms for a very, very long time. All right. So this, I think, is the rub, right? So cameras, even hidden cameras, and this is all legal stuff, so you can do your own research here if you want to check it out. But legally, it is allowed for teachers and principals in public schools. Teachers and principals in public schools can put cameras, even hidden cameras, in hallways and in classrooms without parent or student consent. All right. Now, most schools just have them in places like hallways, right? They don't have them in every classroom because of things like cost. But legally, they're allowed to do it. And what the courts have found over and over and over again is that when you're in a public school, just like when you're in any sort of public government building, right, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in a public school. So if I don't want a camera in a public school classroom, or I don't want to be filmed, the courts would come to me and say, but you're in a public area, you're in a government building, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. And so this is how teachers and principals have gotten away. Now, I'm not saying they use hidden cameras, but they definitely have security cameras like this big, eye in the sky camera you see in this high school hallway, right? You've probably seen this in every public school, right? So they place them there, right? They're usually not hidden, but they're allowed to put cameras in whenever they want, and parents and students have little to no say in this, right? They hardly ever know that they're going in, and when they go in, parents and students don't really say anything about it because they don't think twice about it. Again, because there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. But they're allowed to do it, and teachers and principals do this under the argument of student behavior, right? Security. If a fight happens in the hallway, they can go back and check it out. I've personally known some young students who have been caught on security cameras doing nothing horrible, but definitely doing things that were immature. They've been caught for it and they've gotten in trouble for it. But when you're catching every little act of a student with regard to things like behavior, yeah, you're using cameras for that, and a lot of public schools do it. All right. So here's the big question that I think the people who want cameras in classrooms for content reasons don't have that debate over, like, they're teaching CRT in the classroom. I don't think that's as important as a larger surveillance debate of, okay, public teachers unions, principals, teachers of my local public school. This is a question that I have for you, and this is, if I was a parent, this would be the question I would bring to the PTA. All right. I would say, look, why is it that teachers and administrators can use cameras to surveil student behavior, right? But parents and students can't use cameras to surveil lessons, right? I think that's a reasonable question to ask. If you're going to put, and again, I don't have kids, but if you're going to put a camera in a public school building where you're monitoring student behavior, right? And this is different than like somebody breaking in at midnight to steal stuff. Obviously, the cops want cameras there to see, who stole, computers out of the computer lab at midnight. I'm just talking about, like, kids pushing each other around, having fights in the hallway, monitoring, normalized. I mean, I'd rather not have fights, but it is pretty, normal behavior that, some 16-year-olds are going to get in fights every now and again and get a little push and match. All right. So I would ask them, it's like, why is it that teachers and administrators are allowed to surveil student behavior, which is the argument that was used again 20 years ago. Actually, it's the argument that's been used up until 5 minutes ago when they started talking about putting it in classrooms to surveil teachers. All right. Why is it that you can surveil students' behavior, but parents and students aren't allowed to have cameras, ask for cameras in the classroom in order to surveil lessons, lessons that are being taught? And I think that's a reasonable question that should be asked and answered. I think it's a larger question with regard to who has the right to surveil whom, for what reasons, what are the purposes? Why is it that one side of this relationship, the public school system, is allowed to use cameras for surveillance, but the other side of the relationship, the parents and the students, they're not allowed to use cameras for surveillance purposes, right? I think that's a legitimate question and conversation to have. All right, I go back to the first slide. I don't want cameras in schools, full stop. But I think there needs to become a time when people ask, okay, if I as a student can't use a camera to record my teacher, why can my teacher use a camera to record me? And it should be a two-way street with regard to the relationship of who gets to record whom. I'd rather just have like no more recordings. And if that's not going to happen, then we need to have a bigger conversation as to why some people get to record and others don't. So public schools, right? Teachers, principals, unions, etc. They need to tell parents why it's okay for schools to monitor students through camera usage, but it's not okay for students to monitor teachers, right? I think that this is going to be a hard argument for them to make, but again, I think that that's a more important conversation with regard to overall public surveillance that's going on, as opposed to this sort of flash in the pan. Today we're arguing over like critical race theory. The next day we're going to argue over some other topic in the classroom. We're going to argue over like how sex ed is being taught in the classroom. These are little topics that are flashes in the pan. And I think a bigger, more robust, important debate for long term is going to be one of who gets access to cameras in the classroom. The last thing I'll say about this is it doesn't necessarily have to be they could come back and say, well, it's a cost thing. We're not going to outfit every classroom with cameras, but then it becomes a question. It's like, well, every student in America now has a camera in their phone, right? So do students have the right to live stream their teachers' lessons? These are all important debates. They're definitely going to come to a head this fall when students go back to school. But I think that these are some important questions to raise for all of us, because we are this sort of overly surveilled culture at the moment. And if we're going to have cameras everywhere, we need to have a conversation about who gets to use the cameras and who is the camera being used on and for what purposes. All right. I don't want any cameras in classrooms, but they're already there. We shouldn't ignore the fact they're already there. And since they're already there, we need to have a discussion as to whether or not we want them to continue to be there. All right. Okay. Those are my thoughts on cameras in the classrooms. There you have it. Take it for what you want. Hopefully we can have a deeper discussion about just sort of overall general surveillance state that we live in.